Hey there, in case you were wondering what I was doing in the last enter in activity time here. I was kind of minding my own business doing media stuff, but every now and then I got annoyed by, say, American tourists asking whether the Brandenburg Gate got built by actual Romans, so I thought, fuck it, most of you aren't from Germany anyway, I might as well give you the whole dose of German history from A to Z. Yes, I know what I told you last video, don't remind me. And incidentally, this is where the Romans lived, and this is where Berlin is. There you go, now you'll never make that mistake again. Moving on. The point I'm trying to make in this series is trying to explain how a nation emerges. When we start in the Middle Ages, there was no Germany, there was no definition of what was German, no common German language, and what vague idea there was of who Germans are was commonly held by anyone but the actual Germans. So what has changed? I'm going to show you the entire thing, from hugging trees to war to a strong national identity to even more war to, I guess, hugging trees again. Make yourself comfortable, this might take a while. In the year 300, most of Europe belonged to the Roman Empire after centuries of subjugating other civilizations, burning their records, and rewriting history in a way that every one of their foes became the most evil and treacherous thing in the universe. You know, just Roman things. But how did they manage to occupy such a giant part of the world without having too many problems with the locals? The answer is assimilation. For the most part, they just let the local tribes do their cultural thing while they brought them all kinds of crazy new inventions like proper domestication, paved roads, fresh water supply, not shitting where you eat, and Jesus. By the way, the fact that they let the local tribes practice their old religion as an amalgamation with the new Christian beliefs might be the reason why we still drag pine trees into our living rooms for Christmas. However, most of the Germanic tribes were never conquered by Rome, as much as they tried, and as a result, they continued to develop their own culture. The basic picture of what will define Germans of that age is that of long-haired people wearing pants, living in wooden houses between trees, worshipping nature gods, hunting and farming their own food, and going to war with other fellow tribes from time to time, and there were a lot of those around. So while most of Europe celebrates a new golden era under Roman rule, most of the Germanic tribes living over there were kinda meh about these new Roman ideals. So a deal was made. The Romans were to stop sending their legions into Germanic lands trying to conquer everything, and in return the Germanic tribes would stop slaughtering the Roman legions trying to conquer everything. The Romans felt tremendous about this deal. In fact, they were so happy they built a wall right there. Okay, said the Germanic tribes as they watched Attila the Hun come raiding into their lands through the east. Maybe we do want to be on the other side of that wall. And they started overrunning Roman territories that were barely defended because, you know, Rome was going through hard times. The Germanic tribes made their way through everything that used to be Western Rome, some 80,000 of them coming as far as today's Tunisia, which means Northwestern Africans technically also have a German ancestry to some extent, and at this point you might ask, wait, so does that mean that all of Western Europe and Northwestern Africa is German? No, that means Germanic tribesmen are not only forerunners of today's Germans, but basically half the world at this point. Yay for colonialism, pants for everybody! Eventually, Western Rome collapsed, the Germanics settled down in the ruined cities and went, actually, their culture was pretty neat. Tribal leaders started speaking Latin and adapted Christianity. The Pope was also allowed to stay because, you know, he was a nice guy, I assume. And that's about it for a couple of hundred years. Until a guy named Karl showed up. Karl, a Frankish tribesman, was quite the zealous type, and he loved war. And he loved war over religion, so he took over basically all of Central Europe, converting all the leftover Germanic tribes to Christianity. His buddy, the Pope, made him emperor, continuing a tradition that vanished with the Western Roman Empire more than 300 years ago, but when Karl died there was a bit of a mess with his succession. His son was barely capable of holding his empire together, and 30 years after Karl's death, his grandchildren split his empire into three parts. Western Francia, which will become today's France, Eastern Francia, which will become today's Germany, and Middle Francia, the one they made all the ugly countries from. Over the next couple of decades, Eastern and Western Francia separated further and further until eventually Otto I declares Eastern Francia to be the true successor to the Western Roman Empire. And since he's buddies with the Pope, he got officially crowned, ceremony and all. The Holy Roman Empire of Germanic nations was born. Great, now that's done. How do I keep my realm from falling apart, he said. Then he remembered what happened to Karl's empire, turned around to his most trusted friends and said, listen guys, when I die I want you to decide my successor. The one with the most votes might actually be capable of keeping this thing going. Say 500 years? Can we get that done, boys? Nah, I feel like gambling. Let's say 1,000 years. Gonna make it older than Jesus. From that point on, the emperor would be elected by the Kurfürsten, or Prince Electors. Now to another issue. Otto's new empire was quite big, he couldn't possibly manage all of that by himself, he knew that, so he gave larger parts to friends, local nobles and the church. You can do whatever you want with that, he said. In exchange you'll give me some of your income and knights for the imperial army. Awesome, said the nobles. Then they turned around and realized their lands are still too big to manage them all by themselves, so they turned to friends, family and local nobles and said, you'll take care of that for me, in exchange you'll give me some of your income and provide soldiers for my army. Then they turned around and realized they couldn't possibly manage so many settlements on their own, and I'm going to stop now. So the nobles were sitting happily within their castles, secure from raiding and pillaging hordes, but then it knocks on their door. Surprise, it's everyone else! They also want to live behind their walls, and the nobles went, sure, you can live here and be protected by us, but you'll have to pay taxes. Which was a fine deal for people like smiths and merchants. Sure, it was expensive, but better than getting murdered for owning an actual pair of leather boots. Thus, the first real cities began to grow under the protection of a castle inside high city walls. But how do you supply these cities? They're getting crowded and there's no place to grow crops. Outside the city walls, farmers were given land to cultivate, protected by the knights of nobility, if they would give them some of their food, of course. Neat, said the landlord, who'd usually own more land than he can work on himself, so he gave a farm to a lowly peasant to do that. In return, they'd be allowed to live on said farm and eat some of the food they grow. Nice, said the peasants, now having a roof to sleep under. But then the landlord showed up. Listen, terribly sorry, but you have to give me some more of the crops you grow. But then we don't have enough to eat, sir. Oh, well, guess I'll have to throw you out then. Make room for another poor sod without shelter. You want that? Nah, didn't think so. Seriously though, it's like if folks in the city grow them on fields or something. But when the landlord came home, the nobles were already waiting for him. Hey, listen, we need to talk about the amount of food you pay us. But if I pay you more, I don't have enough to sell for myself. How am I supposed to survive? Oh, well, I'm sure you'll have better luck negotiating with the marauders. Have a nice day. And just like that, I explained to you the imperial succession law, the feudal system, fiefdoms, and the concept of blackmail. We are on a roll today. One might say this system was terribly unfair. It sure is by today's standards, but at the time it was a step up, would you believe that? Today's society couldn't exist without having those early forms of government. After all, our liberal values of today originated from the very cities that initially grew under feudal rule. So now, if you looked at the HRE from above, you'd see a small mess of kingdoms, duchies, counties, bishoprics, and free cities, all pledging allegiance to an emperor elected by the most influential kings and princes of them all. And because keeping in line hundreds of small independent countries is like herding cats, those rulers every now and then declared war on each other or took over each other's lands via marriage without the emperor being able to respond to everything. If an outside power was to do the same, however, things were a bit different. You see, the HRE was barely capable of going to war by itself when there's hundreds of different rulers and as such 100 different opinions on how to fight, whether to fight at all, and what to do with the conquered lands. But if the emperor is strong, he would defend the attacked lands at any cost. And when the emperor is in for the fun, the game is on. That's a scary thought for any potential attacker. Imagine you hunt a deer in the woods, you wake up next morning, look out of the window and see hundreds of the damn things just standing there. They've surrounded your house and they've come to hunt you down. And if you look closely, the stag leading the siege still has bloody antlers from the last fool who dared to do the same. One does not simply mess with the empire. Ironically, having that mess in the center of Europe was one of the greatest sources of stability in medieval times. Other kingdoms couldn't cross it to fight each other, and in and of itself it was too big of a mess to be the aggressor. Perhaps now you'll also understand why everyone in Europe suddenly lost their shit upon Bismarck forming a centralized German state, but I'm getting ahead of myself.